Chapter 2. Growing Up. As I grew into a teen, the amount of work and responsibility increased for me. In addition to the farm work, Dad's paid job and gigs with the orchestra, we started a business making things out of wood. Dad took us to the forest with him to help fell trees, and we helped him with all kinds of sawing, honing and preparation processes. We carried sawdust away from the machines and the leftovers of wood into storage. Sometimes we were given a hammer and a packet of nails, and we competed on who could make apple boxes the fastest. Mum often sat in a little booth and moved logs through the sharp, fast-moving saw. I sometimes stood in for her when Dad was working elsewhere. The steering wheel for the saw shook in your hands as the 2x4s were cut into suitable sizes. But the most important thing was to go to school and do well academically. One morning we went to the school bus early. The bus came every day, picking up 7th and 8th graders to take them to the big municipal school that was 5 kilometres away in Gromnik. Back home, Mum was in the kitchen with my Aunt Mila, who preferred to do indoor things. Our kitchen, with its gas hob and gas tank, was on the second floor of our house. Mum left the kitchen for a moment. Aunt Mila stayed in the kitchen boiling milk, which boiled over. This created a short circuit and the hob caught fire. When my mother returned to the kitchen, the wood panelling on the walls was already on fire. A man who had been passing by transporting milk jugs by horse cart stopped to help. He rushed in, told Mum to get out, cut off the tubing to the gas tank and threw the tank out of the window. My mum went to the master bedroom beside the kitchen, threw out as many things as she could and jumped out herself. The fire department arrived quickly because our village had its own small fire department. My father also belonged to it. The county fire engines also came, sounding their loud sirens. We kids heard the sirens at school, but didn't know it was our house on fire. A moment later, the school teacher came and told us what had happened and gave us permission to go home early. My brother and I started walking the 5 kilometres home, our hearts full of dread of what we would find when we got there. Were our loved ones all right? What we saw when we arrived was devastating. Smoke had created ugly black areas around the broken kitchen window. Everywhere was covered in water and pieces of burnt things. But our loved ones were unhurt. The firemen and anyone who went into the kitchen to see the damage were amazed that a paper picture of Jesus had strangely remained undamaged in the middle of extreme heat and flames. This was the picture my mother had received from her aunt, who had moved to America when she was young. My aunt loved my mother and us, as she didn't have a family of her own. Now and then she sent us packages that contained clothes, sweets and toys. This picture had been in one of those packages. The picture was of a very alive-looking man who had long, light brown curly hair, a neat beard trimmed short, and a beautiful, loving face. The face was surrounded by a light that seemed to emanate from his being. The picture went down to his chest, and he was wearing a white garment resembling a shirt. The figure of Jesus clearly set out from the dark background. His eyes were directed diagonally towards heaven, as if he was in a trusting prayer pose, looking to the Heavenly Father. Someone picked up the picture from under its glass, which had partly melted and broken. The frame was completely burnt. "How is this possible?" one of the witnesses to this wonder asked. "How did the paper not burn in this heat?" "Jesus protected you," another said. I don't want to know what would have happened if the gas tank had exploded indoors. Then practically nothing would have been left of the house. It would have been like a bomb. And how did the fire not spread anywhere else, because only the kitchen was destroyed? Yes, there was much to wonder at, and a great gratitude to God filled our hearts. After renovations, the picture of Jesus was placed in a new frame and was put back in its honorary place above the door between the kitchen and the bedroom. The news of the miracle that happened to the picture of Jesus spread through the village and maybe beyond. We were very grateful to God for his help and protection. In Catholicism, gratefulness is often expressed by giving the priest money to sanctify a mass for whatever someone was grateful for, or for requests. People would, for example, ask for health, success, or something like that. It is believed that the more masses you buy, the more certain it is that God will give you what you ask for. Sometimes tens of requests come in for the same thing, and the price is in accordance. Even so, people will often give even their last pennies for God to hear them. When there are more requests than the priest can handle, he sends them on to monasteries that have more priests for performing these paid masses. A small town called Tucho is situated 14 kilometers from our village. A monastery was built there, and its centre was St. Mary's Church. It is a place well known all over the Catholic world for St. Mary's pilgrimages. Thousands of people flock there, especially at the beginning of August, when they have a great celebration with market stalls and sellers. They sell all kinds of statues of saints, pictures, St. Mary's, rosaries, religious jewellery, and other bric-a-brac. The name of this fest, Audiobook, refers to the forgiveness of sins. For Catholics, it's a time when St. Mary particularly influences Jesus, and the people who go there to confess and have communion at that time will get their sins forgiven in some special way. Ever since I was a small child, we went there with my parents every year, even though the most important thing for us kids was our parents buying us sweets and bric-a-brac. The boys particularly liked bang snaps, so the banging could be heard all through July all over the village. In second grade, I did what is known as communia, a celebration held for children who had been schooled in the catechism. That's when a child is allowed to take communion for the first time. Later, after confirmation, I was a mature Catholic believer, and I tried my best to fulfill all the rituals associated with this celebration. The church in Tuchow is big, with many confessional priests, and yet more outside, under a cover by the side wall. Even so, it took long queuing to confession. We aimed to get to confession before the communion that took place during Mass, because it was important to take communion in a holy place. You couldn't go to communion if you had sinned or hadn't been to confession in a long time. The church and its auxiliary buildings are built on a hill with a steep road. The whole area is carefully planned to serve Catholic religious rituals in many ways. The outdoor altar is for Mass in summer and for particular fests, when there are so many people that they can't fit inside the church. Often heavy rain would occur during those outdoor services, and people would run for cover under any roof. The outdoor altar and church, which had been built in the yard of the main church, were well protected under a large cover. The main altar in the church had a gold-gilded holy picture of St. Mary. The crown on her head left no doubt about who was the queen of this church. The side altars have other saints, and the right-hand bay has an altar for Jesus. In the left-hand bay, there is a huge painting of Jesus that covers the whole wall. The picture has been painted according to a vision seen by a Catholic nun called Faustina. The nun was later made a saint. And, of course, like with every saint, people pray to her. For some reason, something always drew me to the bay for Jesus, and I prayed there. Mary was important to me, but Jesus was especially important. The door used to leave the church was a side door because it was important to write a prayer or thanks into a notebook set, as it was believed, at the feet of the statue of Mary that performs miracles. The statue is about 1 meter high and decorated with valuable jewellery that people have left there. The pilgrims believe that sacrificing jewellery to the statue makes St. Mary show special favour to them, and prayers are surer to be answered. Passers-by crowd the area, wanting to touch the statue. That's why it has been placed in a glass case, so people wouldn't touch it with their dirty hands. People wipe the glass with a clean handkerchief, and then their own or their children's faces with it. The great fest was over, and all the sins had been forgiven because the confessional priest forgave them, and all the associated rituals had been carried out. Mary had been praised, so all was well now, and everyone was on their way to heaven. We even felt a lot holier after having been to church. Then we returned to our ordinary life, but God remained somewhere far away. In the autumn of 1980, my father left for the USA. It was a difficult time in Poland, when the chains of communism were crumbling and the shops had even less to offer than before. There were rumours that many people, especially men, disappeared as the Ormo, i.e. the Communist Secret Service, took them for questioning. Many never came back, but disappeared. On the one hand, I was glad that Dad got a visa and was able to go to America, but on the other hand, we stayed home with our mum pregnant. There was uncertainty about whether we would make it. The decision for Dad to leave was made nevertheless, and we thought that it would be for the best for all of us. We could get a lot of zlotys with the dollars that Dad would earn, and life would become easier at some point. Dad also promised to send packages from America. The first time I got to see airplanes at Warsaw Airport was when I was given permission to see my dad off with my uncle and godmother. It was a wonderful experience for me because I dreamed of becoming a stewardess and having a fine life abroad. My mother gave birth to my youngest brother Lucas in March. She was diagnosed with blood poisoning after birth and fell ill with severe depression. I had to take care of the baby, mum, and everything else. The neighbours, mother's mother, and her youngest sister came to help occasionally. Little by little, mum got better, but the tendency to depression remained a permanent issue for her. I was in the 8th grade when it came time to choose further studies. I wasn't able to go anywhere far because I had to help at home whenever I could. I was a good student, so we decided that I would go to college. I passed the exams and was admitted to the high-standard Tuchowa College that was closest to us. I was happy and grateful to God that I was able to go. After all, Mum paid the priest money for a mass on behalf of this matter. It was the summer holidays and my cousins came to visit. Now I also had better clothes because Dad sent big packages from America. They contained jeans and other fashion clothes bought in charity shops. Lucina, who was 2 years older than me, was interested in boys, but the rest of us were more interested in making trouble for those around us. We often slept in the hay barn in summer. It was comfortable on top of the fresh, sweet-smelling hay. One night in the hay barn, we thought about what tricks we could play today. We came to the conclusion that we would fetch some fresh food from the neighbours. So we fetched tomatoes, cucumbers and apples that we ate in the darkness of night together. And it was such fun. As we ate, we wondered what crunched between our teeth. In the morning, we saw that some of the vegetables had worms, and our laughter died. We thought it was great fun to go knocking on people's windows at night with our faces painted black with soot. When they heard us, we ran off with the neighbours shouting after us. But one night was different. I woke up to a strange sound in the barn. It came from somewhere lower down, where the straw was kept. Oh yeah! I woke up with a start. It was the early hours of the morning. "Did you hear that?" I asked the others. "No," one of them said, and then it came again. I didn't get to ask again whether they'd heard it when everyone was already at the exit window, trying to get to the ladder, wanting to be the fastest one out. We ran home across the yard and wondered what it might have been. "Hey, do you remember our parents telling us how they had seen a pale reddish calf without a head in exactly that spot?" "Yeah, so was that its ghost?" We all wondered, wide-eyed. But because it was still very early, we went back to bed. In the morning, we woke early because we wanted to go to early morning mass, so we'd have the rest of the day off to do what we wanted. I glanced out the window and looked toward the hay barn and saw a man coming out of it, shaking straw off his clothes. "See," I shouted to everyone, "here's your ghost. Chisik was too tired to go home because he was too drunk, so he slept in our barn." And we had a good laugh. Summer ended and I started school in Tuchow. I got a place in a dormitory that was in the same building as the school. The rooms were big and there were more than 10 girls in the same room. It didn't bother me because, being social by nature, I enjoyed having lots of friends around me. I became friends with a few girls who I spent more time with. One of the girls was good at dancing and taught the others. I learned well, and soon I was teaching dance at home to my brothers and the neighbors' kids. I also took up karate, which gave me my first introduction to concentration exercise, my own inner world, and drawing power into myself from the outside. Now I had more time to concentrate on my studies, but all my new hobbies and going out with boys took my attention to the extent that my studies began to lag. Often we came back on Sunday afternoon after the weekend, hoping to study a bit before school on Monday. But even then, we ended up doing something completely different. Karate was forbidden to us, especially in school, so we practiced in secret. The dorm overseer found out about our hobby and asked us to pick up some girls from a late train or bus so that the local boys' gang wouldn't give them trouble. Reports of how skilled we were at karate and how quickly we had progressed in it spread in the city, and we were feared and respected even by the boys' gangs. Soon we became friends with them, and they stopped giving us trouble, and we spent a lot of time together. Sometimes I would get a ride to school with my classmate. She had a driving license and smoked. She offered me a menthol cigarette, and it started my long tobacco addiction. The dorm was on the first floor with deep trenches beneath the windows. Under the dorm were the classrooms on the ground floor. There was a thin wall in the middle of the trench which divided it in half. Often at night, when everyone had gone to bed, we got up with a few friends and climbed out of the window to smoke and, sometimes, drink beer with the boys. That was when I had my first crushes, and I began to date boys. Crushes and falling in love came and went at a quick pace, and it was time for a new adventure again. Many boys got left behind with their hearts broken because I was unable to reciprocate their feelings. A busy party life began for me and totally took me with it. Other things in my life started getting better. I no longer needed to take responsibility for my younger siblings so much or work at home. I had good clothes, a bank account with dollars, and was popular with my friends and with boys. But despite all, the vacuum deep in my heart didn't get filled up by these things. At some point, I became so arrogant that I took a girl's boyfriend just to prove that I could have anyone I wanted. I continued partying and having fun at my home village and its surroundings. Especially summer holidays and all of my free time were taken up by having fun and being with my friends. Our own group of friends often came together, and our time together was all but innocent. We had our own gang that included my 2 eldest brothers, the neighbors' boys, and our cousin Kaska. We built a clubhouse in a wood nearby and gathered around a campfire there. We got wine from somewhere and got drunk. The boys brought chickens that we roasted over the fire. Sometimes the boys even stole the chickens. The wine ran out, so we went to get some more from a man we knew who had previously worked for my father's business. The homemade, half-fermented liquid went to the head fast at first, but after a while it was insufficient. So my brother developed a method for cooking moonshine. And so the stronger alcohol entered my life, and it would affect my life for decades, sometimes more, sometimes less. When we did things that were bad, in other words, sin according to Catholic teaching, we went to confession and communion. Our punishment was a few Ave Marias, or if we had been particularly naughty, maybe a litany to be said to some saint, or a rosary prayer to Saint Mary. And then it was business as usual. My academic progress had become so bad that my teacher was threatening to make me repeat the year. That's when I spent a whole weekend studying history. At the same time, I prayed for Saint Mary to influence Jesus to help me pass my exams. I also prayed to Jesus. I passed the exams well and was told off for being lazy. It was the custom at the time to bring presents to teachers. Almost all the parents brought something, whether it was eggs, homemade sausages, or money. I believe that there were teachers who didn't do so, but many were happy to receive bribes, and it was obvious in class whose parents had been to meet the teacher bringing gifts. The student was cordially addressed by their first name, and their achievements were overly praised. At some point, my mother also came to see a certain teacher who knew that my father was an American and was nasty to me without reason because of it. My mother asked how things were and gave him chocolate, at which the teacher shouted, "What's this?" Then my mother quickly replied that the envelope also contains dollars, and the teacher calmed down. After that, I got peace for a while, and the teacher was even nice to me. It was a couple of years since my dad had gone abroad, and we missed him much. He was especially missed by my mother, who had to take responsibility for everything. Dad wrote to us often, and we wrote back. My little brother grew up without having seen his father except in pictures. We took photos and sent them to Dad, and he was very happy for them. Dad had a good job in America, and he lived in the same house with his cousin and some other Polish friends. Even though he had to work hard, life there was easier, and he would have wanted the whole family to move there. But that wasn't possible because he had already overstayed his visa, and it was impossible to get a visa for such a large family. Finally, under great pressure from us, he gave in and came back after 2.5 years. His coming was joyful news. Soon after Dad's arrival, we started large renovations on the house because us kids were growing and 5 of us needed our rooms and our own space. So the roof was taken down and we built another floor. I got to move into my own room upstairs. After all, I was nearly of full age. We talked much about my future and what I would want to do after college. My parents thought I should go to nursing college, but all I dreamed about was finishing school and going to work or to America. My father had contacts there who promised me work in the same restaurant that Dad had worked in as a second job. There was time to think about it because exams weren't quite yet. It was important to my parents that I live a respectable life. Especially my dad was adamant about it. It meant that he hadn't offered me a shot of vodka until I was 18. They forbid alcohol for anyone underage, except we drank in secret. Smoking was not accepted in our family at all. It was much later that I would be able to smoke in front of my parents. I set only one line for myself that I didn't want to cross, and that was sex. I felt it belonged within marriage and I wanted to keep it that way. Officially, boys hadn't come to ask me out to a disco or for a drive until I was of age. Everyone knew that my father wouldn't give a minor permission to go out dancing or on a date. Now it was a new phase in my life. Now I was solely responsible for how I would build my life. My brother had a small moped and I liked to ride it too. I also tried my friends' motorbikes and went racing along the bendy village road, enjoying the speed. I asked to take driving lessons, but my father thought that girls didn't need driving licenses. Boys were a different matter. I got angry about it and said I might even become a taxi driver, but changing my father's mind was a difficult thing to do. Exams were approaching, but first there would be the senior ball. It was always held a few months before the exams. After the ball, we no longer went to school but studied at home. I was living as a lodger with a friend in a rented flat at the time. This was because I wasn't allowed to stay in the dormitory anymore because they found out about my father working abroad. They assumed we could afford to rent a place. I planned the decor for the ballroom. Friends came to help me with it and we created a winter scene in the auditorium. Everyone had learned to dance the Polonaise. My dress was made from material that my dad had brought from America. I dated a certain boy who I liked a lot at the time, but just before the ball we had an argument and I wasn't able to forgive him. I asked another boy who I knew had a crush on me to be my partner and he gladly accepted. I didn't spend much time with him at the ball though, and instead went with a boy from town who had gate crashed the ball. This made my actual date really sad. I didn't care much about the feelings of others. I took whoever I wanted and left the guy on a whim and didn't see anything wrong with it. Later, I found out that a certain boy who I had dumped had tried to harm himself. I just thought it was his problem. I kept partying and didn't have the time for studying for my exams. I wasn't too bothered about it. Only a few people studied much. Anyone who was clever just cheated in the exams. Either you made notes for the exam yourself or got some from last year's graduates. You could buy exam notes from previous graduates. These were long, narrow strips of paper folded in accordion style, full of writing. They were threaded together to keep them organized and to take up less space. All I needed now was a blazer with lots of little pockets in the lining. I lived fairly close to St. Mary's Monastery, so I sometimes went there to ask for things. But this was really important, so I had to give them money and request a mass for my exams to go well. I prayed in front of the picture of St. Mary, but something drew me towards the side altar with a statue of the crucified Christ and the picture of the merciful Jesus. I also went to confession and to communion so that all the rituals would be done and God would help me in my exams. But I still didn't stop the partying. My oral exams went well, but I was mostly worried about math and Polish. Then the exams came and everyone went to their seats nervously. I sighed with relief because I got a place in the middle of the row and could use my notes without being seen. People were constantly anxious about being caught by the invigilators. No one was caught, the exam proceeded calmly, and we left the room. A few days later we came to see the results, and what joy it was to see my name among the graduates. School ended, and we said goodbye to our friends. I missed some of them more than others, but not school. It was an overwhelming feeling of freedom when it was finally over. After having enjoyed a holiday and my freedom for a while, I had to decide what to do with my life. My parents thought that if I didn't want to study, I had to find work. One of my parents' contacts found me a job in the town of Tarnow, 36 kilometers away. The same contact also knew of a small room in a block of flats where I could go as a lodger. It was important so that I wouldn't need to live with my father's sisters. It had been a good place to live, but I always felt out of place at my aunt's house. And soon I started my job and my new life in the city. My cousins lived in the same town, and we got to party and spend a lot of time together. Alcohol, tobacco, and party life started to tax my strength. My boyfriends never lasted long. I was good at my job. I quickly learned the tasks of a medical secretary and was able to help the nurses whenever I had the time. We had fun with some of the younger employees, and that was when I tried smoking opium. I acquired it from a colleague whose husband had brought some from the Far East. I didn't get hooked on it. I felt I got enough of a high from cigarettes and alcohol. Also, I had experienced a situation earlier where an older man had mixed drugs into my drink and had done what he wanted to the unconscious girl. It made me keep away from those drugs. But I wasn't happy, even though I was in the prime of a young person's life. I dreamed of something else that would fill the vacuum in my heart. I met a girl called Marta who was looking for a place to stay because rooms were hard to find. I took her with me and, with the permission of my landlady, she came to live with me. We slept in a small room that could just fit a narrow bed and a cupboard. It was a squeeze, but I liked Marta a lot, and she was a party girl, like me. One day, the media announced a major event. Pope John Paul II was visiting Poland and was coming to Tarnow the next day. And that wasn't all. He would be driving close by our block of flats in his papamobile. It would be great to see such an important person so close at hand, the person who is next from God. I had the night before the Pope's arrival free, so we went to party. The next day, we didn't wake up until the day was far spent. We had a terrible hangover and headache because we had had too much red wine, and we couldn't even get up to see the Pope. I went to visit my parents at the weekends whenever I could. Our village gang got together again. In addition to the usual members, we were joined by a couple of boys on a large motorbike who I had met somewhere. My cousin Kaska also came to visit, and we all went into the woods to our campfire to drink wine. When we were all drunk, I decided to go a short stretch on the large motorbike. I had no helmet. "You're not going on your own," Kaska said. "I'm coming with you." "Okay, come on then," I replied, already sitting on the heavy bike. "Hold on," I shouted to her sitting behind me. The motorbike let out a loud noise as I pressed on the gas. We took off at high speed along the bumpy little country road that was full of potholes. Usually only cows, horses and tractors went that way. We passed by our house at high speed and kept going, laughing. Then, for some reason, the bike slipped into a bend in a stream where the water had carved out a small waterfall. We fell off, and the hot exhaust pipe of the bike burnt both our legs badly. The boys ran to see what had happened. They found us in the muddy water with the bike fallen on top of us. But the sound coming from under the motorbike was not groaning or complaining. It was laughter. "What happened?" one of the boys asked. "Are you all right?" "I guess so," we both said and kept laughing. The boys lifted the bike off us and helped us up. We didn't feel the pain because of our severe intoxication, but the next day was all the worse. Fortunately, nothing worse happened, even though we both had burns on our legs. My burn healed completely, but Kaska was left with a big permanent scar. My life seemed to be more or less like it should be. Most of those my age lived like this. We sped through life, enjoying everything fun. But even though I filled my life with everything it had to offer, something was still missing. I became disappointed and fed up with the Polish men I met and didn't find the love I longed for. My aunt saw an advert in a paper that read, "A Scandinavian man is looking for a wife." I thought that was the answer I was looking for. It wasn't long before I got my first letter from Finland. The writer was Renata Tolvanen. I had taught myself enough English to understand some of what he wrote, but my cousin who studied English in school came to my aid. We phoned and soon we agreed to meet in Warsaw. I went to meet him and fell in love quickly. We immediately got engaged and planned our future together. 3 months later, Jarmo visited my family and soon we got married. We made our marriage official by a wedding. Despite this, the feeling of emptiness came back into my heart from time to time. I thought that moving in with my husband in Finland would fix it. Could it be? It was a few months since the wedding and my visa came through, ensuring I could go to be with my husband. But then doubts came over my mind. What if I'm not ready after all? Is the life I had dreamed of there? My doubts became stronger when I lived it up and had fun with my friends. I often wondered whether I was really ready to give up everything I already had. And then August came and it was time to move to Finland. We had a farewell party with lots of friends. They kept saying, "If only you didn't leave. It was only a civil wedding. It's nothing. It would be different if it was a Catholic wedding." And yet, when the party was over and the headache and feeling of sick came, the empty feeling returned. Then I thought I would need to at least try what living abroad would do for me. Some of the gang saw me to the airport. We said goodbye with tears and they assured me that if I didn't like being in Finland, I should come back.